All right, looks like the numbers have stabilized, so I think we can get going. We're just after 2 o'clock, so welcome. Welcome to our webinar on creating a municipal business case for investing in equity, diversity, and inclusion. My name is Darren Reedy. I'm the Manager of Welcoming and Inclusive Communities for AUMA, and I'm pleased to be moderating this webinar on an important topic, and one that we felt there's value to bring to our members at any stage of this work, whether you're just at ground zero and trying to start the conversation, or whether you're a champion that's been doing a ton of work on this in your municipality. At any point in time, you always likely need to put forward a business case, a case to demonstrate the value of what you're trying to accomplish in the sphere of equity and inclusion work. And so we have two great speakers here to talk about their experiences over the last couple of years, and we're excited to have you joining us. So now up to 47, that's great. So nice to see everyone using the chat box already. That's great. I want to take a moment to acknowledge that we are recording this webinar from Treaty 6 territory, the traditional territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, and Métis people. And it's important for us to recognize this and to acknowledge this in terms of the history of Indigenous peoples on these lands and the spirit of the treaty agreements. And in particular, when it comes to municipal governments, reminding ourselves about the work ahead in terms of reconciliation and supporting the calls to actions of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So again, as I mentioned, we're joined here by Erin and Jennifer, and I'm going to introduce them in a minute. But first off, I want to invite everyone in the chat box to, if you want to throw in and part of the conversation to add to it, what are you hoping to achieve? Obviously, this topic covers many facets of this work, but what was the one thing that you're hoping to gain from this webinar? What are you hoping to experience and take away? And then we would be happy to try and address those things as we go here. So again, feel free to use that chat box and start the conversation as a group here. And while you're using that chat box, just talk a little bit about the Welcoming Inclusive Communities. It was started in 2006 as a partnership with the government of Alberta and has been instrumental since then in supporting municipal governments across Alberta to take meaningful steps to address issues of racism and discrimination. And our WIC initiative in particular offers tools, educational opportunities such as this, and support to help municipal governments and communities to improve policies, improve practices, to support the creation of more welcoming and inclusive spaces and communities. And if you want to learn any more about how the support that AUMA offers in terms of supporting municipal governments, feel free to get in touch with us. There'll be contact information at the end of this. And you can also visit our website at www.auma.ca. So in terms of your participation, this is how you can see at the bottom. A lot of you are already using the chat box. That's great to see. The Q&A box is also a function available to you. So we're going to be taking questions throughout. So if you have questions as we're going, feel free to drop those into the Q&A box. If you're putting a question in the chat box, we might not capture it. So please use the Q&A box for any questions that you might have for the speakers. And while we're doing that, let's take a quick poll just to get an idea of who we have with us today in the room. So on your screen now, it should be populated there. We just want to know what is the size of community you're with and what is your position in the community, if you are with an organization or not. So this webinar is scheduled for 60 minutes and it is being recorded. Now, while I say it's being recorded, your comments and the questions that are posted in the Q&A box are not visible to in the recording. And we want to create, a safe space for you. So if there's an uncomfortable question for you, still you can post it in the Q&A box, but there's a little extra box there that you can click to say that anonymous. And then when you post that question, your name won't be attached to it, if that helps offer some additional comfort. And again, using the chat box to keep the conversation going. I can see there's one comment here: how to make my organization more diverse and to benefit from the potential that diversity and inclusion brings to an organization, how we can do better. Yeah, nice to see those comments coming in there. That's great. Keep that up. And I think we've done enough on the poll now. So let's see what we've got here. So I'm just going to share the results. So majority of people, we got 77% over 10,000 population. And in terms of your position, we've got a mix of the majority are in a coordinator or support role, another 26% in a mid-level manager position, and then a mixture of elected officials, CIOs, and members of senior management teams. So welcome. Thanks again for joining us. That gives you, Erin and Jennifer, some idea of who we've got with us today and what they're hoping to take away from your expertise. So. Now, in terms of our agenda, we're going to, of course, do some introductions in a moment, and then we're going to start off with a conversation about how to open the door to discuss equity, diversity, and inclusion. We're going to talk about the importance of reinforcing the why, and setting some expectations for those that you're involved in the conversations with, and then ideally talking about how to show that this work applies across the entire organization that you work with. And then we're going to do a deep dive into some of the components of a business case. And then, of course, take your questions at the end. So we're here for 60 minutes. And now I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. So as I think I alluded to at the beginning, both Jennifer and Erin work with two municipalities that have taken some broad steps in the last couple of years, and they'll be able to speak about that. And in particular, both of them used a written business case that was presented to management and council to help gain the support that they needed to move this work forward. And so we wanted to have a conversation with the two of them about how they approach this subject, how they use their business case to draw in, to ensure more success. And so with that, I'm going to start with Jennifer. Jennifer Hoyer is joining us from the City of Fort Saskatchewan, where she works as the Inclusion and Seniors Coordinator. Jennifer holds a bachelor's degree in social work and has spent 12 years working in municipal government, focused in human services. And through her career, she has developed a passion for creating connection, belonging within communities. So welcome, Jennifer. And Erin Rutherford is currently the manager of social planning with the City of Spruce Grove. She has over 10 years of municipal experience and a Master's of Arts in community development and works on both organizational and community change to support communities that thrive. So thank you to both of you for being here this afternoon. I know the three of us have had certainly many conversations leading into this, and so pleased to bring that conversation to a broader audience. And I'd like to start with giving the audience a taste of, what is the progress that each of your organizations has made over the last couple of years? Just to give some context about, you've opened the door for this conversation at some point, you presented a business case, and then now you're in that stage of implementing what council has approved you to do. So maybe if you can just give me the 30-second commercial, let's say, of what you've been doing over the last couple of years and the advancements you've been able to make. So Jennifer, let's start with you.
Thank you so much, Darren. I'm really happy to be here and talk a little bit about our experience here in Fort Saskatchewan. As Darren mentioned, we've been on this journey for probably about 1.5 years now. And in that time, we've joined the Coalition of Inclusive Municipalities. We have passed a diversity and inclusion policy for the city, as well as an action plan. And that action plan has positioned us to really look at our operations with an inclusive lens, and then make the adjustments needed to move towards more intentional inclusion. We've also recently introduced required training for the organization, and we're really working on developing tools that will support staff in using the knowledge that they get from the training so we can build capacity across our organization. We're really proud of the work we've done so far, but we're also really looking forward to what's to come here.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. And Erin.
Yes, thank you for having me as well today. I am with the City of Spruce Grove, and like Jennifer, we started our journey in equity, diversity, inclusion about 1.5 years ago with the Measuring Municipal Inclusion Grant. And some of the actions that have come out of that have been catalysts. Like we were able to do GBA plus training throughout the organization, and now we're rolling out an equity lens tool that helps individuals within the organization apply the GBA plus learning to their individual work. But one of the things we're really proud of is in this year's corporate plan, we were approved for a 3-year initiative called the Community Inclusion Initiative. And this initiative has 4 focus areas, the first being internal work. So the work that we as an organization need to continue to do to strengthen our diversity and inclusion. And then it has 3 community pillars, one being reconciliation, the second one being marginal no longer, and the third being celebrating diversity. So those 3 focus pillars will also be external facing throughout the 3 years as well. So we're really excited for the journey we're going to take with that initiative.
Okay, thanks, Erin. Thanks for that background. So let's start off on our first topic about getting your organization ready. And I think it's pretty clear that you need to define your audience. Who are you trying to convince, I guess, to start getting that support? Are you talking to your manager? Are you talking to the CAO? Or are you going directly to council? Or if you're an elected official, are you trying to appeal to your fellow council members? And so really defining your audience will help you think about some of the strategies you might take, some of the information that you need to pull together for that audience. And then, of course, part of that is also thinking about who your potential champion, who are the supporting voices in the room that you want to bring in to make sure that you demonstrate that it's not just you bringing this conversation forward, there's a broader group of people. And so with that in mind, that kind of brings me to my first question on this topic. And Erin, going to you, based on your experience, what do you suggest to your audience right now, to those that are here today? What do you suggest to them about how to open the door for a meaningful conversation? I think that word is important here. Meaningful is that you're really actually starting to address these issues in a meaningful, open, transparent conversation. Like what is your experience and approach in opening that door to start having that conversation?
Thanks, Darren. So this is a topic that is challenging to discuss because everybody has different perspectives and comes from different backgrounds and experiences that they're bringing. I also have found in my career that a lot of people are nervous about saying the wrong thing or being judged for not knowing. And so to me, the approach that I like to take to open up the conversation is to really get curious and to really try to ground conversation in values-based discussion about what's important and why is it important. And how does this work of diversity and inclusion link with that? Because usually when you find the commonality through values, that's the best place to move forward. So a lot of asking open-ended questions, if somebody does make a comment that, could be like, hey, whoa, why are we saying that? Rather than approaching it that way and just shutting the conversation down completely, can you tell me more about that? Or, what's the perspective that you have on that? Or another thing that I like to do is also, we know that things like oppression are invisible unless people see them. And so how do we start to show people some of those things that they might not be aware of in a way that's gentle and in a way that gets them thinking? So I really try to, in those conversations, when I'm asking those whys, I'd like to also try to provide alternate perspectives as well, and how do you think that individuals with this experience would feel in this context, and get people thinking beyond their own vision. And I found that it works really well. It's opened some really rich, meaningful, and forward-moving conversations within our organization.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's kind of the lens that we all have. I think it's the term, right? And yeah, I sometimes think about once I became a father, realizing how much my perspective on things changed quite a bit. Anyways, that's a side conversation. So the next point we have here on the slide is being intentional with your language. Jennifer, I guess when it comes to language, there are certainly some terms, I think we already talked about GBA plus, gender-based analysis plus. Like personally, that term has never spoken to me well. I think it's confusing for a lot of people. It's a little bit too technical. And so, was there certain terms that you have really tried to take advantage of or avoid when you were having these conversations?
I think it's really common for discussion around equity and inclusion to come to be divisive, to have different sides of it. And you can get stuck in debating or the key terms or really looking at what's not happening. For us and for myself, I felt it was really a lot stronger to look at where you want to be going, what you want to see happen. And how we did that is by attaching inclusion work to the priorities that already exist for our municipality. So look at what our municipality wants to be doing, how we want to be serving our residents. We ask questions like, how does inclusion work support our commitment to serve all residents? This is where we started, rather than focusing in some of those other areas. So for example, in the conversation around growth as a community, we talked about how businesses and residents are starting to look at what communities are doing around diversity and inclusion. What is their commitment before they choose to settle there? We also had a discussion around how many funders are starting to ask how your programs and services increase equity. And we need to be able to speak to that, and we need to be able to show that we're doing that. You could also talk about public engagement and how inclusion work really supports stronger public engagement, which then supports stronger outcomes. So for us, connecting equity and inclusion to that broader municipal agenda was a better place to start the conversation and a better place to move the conversation forward. I do want to note that I think it's really important that you talk about those divisive terms or that you talk about those terms that might not be as well understood, like gender-based analysis plus or privilege. But I don't know that it's always the best place to start. It might be where you go once you get your learning going.
That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, both of you are kind of keying on the same thing, that it's really focusing on values, right? At the end of the day, what do we all value in our lives and what we value for our communities, and let that guide the conversation. Okay, great. So moving on to our next kind of theme here, and that's reinforcing the why. In terms of the benefits of supporting the work around equity and diversity and inclusion, we have AUMA has a PowerPoint on our website that actually gives some of the breakdown of the benefits of addressing social conflict, and the other one was around innovation and just bringing people together and having a better conversation, and creating a place where people just feel more comfortable, that sense of belonging. And that's kind of the purpose of this work in a lot of ways. But that in itself doesn't always convince people, just talking about those principled statements. And the other challenge when people try to push, in your cases, when you're bringing this forward, there's always going to be people at the table that will say that you can't measure outcomes, or it's not the responsibility of our community or the municipality to be doing work around this. And so, Erin, my question to you is, how did you show that EDI, or equity, diversity, and inclusion work, aligns with the strategic priorities of the municipality?
Thanks, Darren. So, Jennifer alluded to it when she was talking in the last slide, but, some key examples of what I connected our business case to would have been the City of Spruce Grove strategic plan. So, for example, one of our pillars is where people choose to live. And so I was able to link how this work supports that vision of council. I also linked it with other important documents for the organization, such as our social sustainability framework and our COVID-19 recovery framework. So I was able to look at some of these pertinent documents in the organization and link with those benefits that Darren mentioned on the website from AUMA with that work and those visions going forward. So those are some examples of what I use, but whatever documents are really guiding documents for your organizations are ones to look at and make those linkages with.
Okay. And I think it's worth noting, one of the points here on the slide is around the duty to serve all residents. And I think that's a piece that from a lens perspective, some of us don't really understand how other people are impacted by those services. So really trying to step into their shoes and understand, how does this program relate to different people, and are we really meeting their needs? So I'm going to come back to you again, Erin. And the other thing around here is risks of not taking action. And when you brought this conversation up in your organization, how did you talk about the risks of not taking action, or what were those aspects that you shared?
Yeah, so in our business case, I broke it down into highlighting a few risks of not taking action. One of them was around the theme of safety and community sustainability. So highlighting that as this community continues to grow and diversify, that not taking action on equity, diversity, and inclusion poses a risk to both community safety and community sustainability. The other theme I highlighted in terms of a risk of not taking action was accessibility of programs and services, and that goes to that duty to serve all residents and the risk of by not doing it, are we actually truly serving all the residents we have the intended to? And we talk about the importance of language, and one thing I would like to highlight here is under this section, I did use a lot of stronger language, intentionally so. So under this one, I did talk about unintentional systemic inequality that could be caused by not taking action. And those words were intentional. So I think we also have to think about when stronger language can serve the purpose we're trying to achieve as advocates. The third theme that we highlighted in our business case around risk was the risk to not achieving the goals in the strategic plan. So again, highlighting that by not taking action, these goals that we aspire to are at risk, and this is how they're at risk. I also highlighted in the business case other risk factors and then their mitigation measures. So I wanted to also be honest about the journey we were about to go on. So highlighting stuff like the sustainability after 3 years. So how are we going to build into this 3-year initiative sustainability after the funding ends in 3 years with the municipality? What is some of the risks with doing community-based projects, and how do we need to think about this in the context of COVID-19 and moving this initiative forward? So I did also highlight some of those items in the risk section as well.
Okay. So I think you've already kind of given us an intro into the conversation around being honest. So Jennifer, in our prep, you know, as we were leading up to this, you talked about the importance of being honest when you're framing this conversation with your audience, whether it's council or management team or whoever it is you're talking with. How did you approach that in your municipality? And, you know, what kinds of conversations do you have to set those expectations?
Thank you, Darren. Yeah, you know, there are some big topics to discuss when we're looking at that commitment to hear diverse voices. And in doing that, we might look at challenging some of the power structures that are currently set up, or some of the ways that we're used to making decisions and we're used to looking at things. So I found it really valuable for me to have that conversation up front before we got there and discuss how we could possibly manage that. One of the reasons that that was so important, or I found that to be so important, is that if we say as a community or as an organization, we are making this commitment to inclusion, but then there are structures in place that continue to have actions to the contrary, we really risk eroding the trust of staff or our community members, and brand erosion as well. So it's something to be talked about before you get to the place of needing to challenge that. I also find that sometimes when we're trying to start something new, we try to fold it into somebody's portfolio, or just say that we can do it. Just say we can do it. We'll find the resources. You know, and in this case, I think it's really, really important, again, to have those conversations about resources. Because again, if we say we can just do it and then we can't, we're really risking that, breaking that trust in this specific area. So we talked about what funds, what financial commitment, what staff commitment, what was necessary and needed, and what we could and could not do with different levels of commitment. We were very clear about that up front. We also acknowledged that there would be unforeseen costs, things that we could not tell you about. So for example, if we were going to commit to doing an accessibility audit of our community, or even our city-owned facilities, there's going to be costs that arise there. And I can't tell you at this point what those will be. So really honest from that that point. I also want to say that because this specific initiative, I'll use that word, but this specific initiative does touch the whole organization. This can't be done out of one department. It touches the whole organization. It's so important to be honest about the resources needed from other departments too, and really have those conversations with them about their capacity and what they might need to participate. I find this made it way easier to be transparent, but also a really great offshoot is that it built allies along the way too in this work.
Finding those champions in other areas of the organization that you can rely on and pull on. Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right, so this slide talks a little bit about sharing examples of how equity and inclusion practices apply across the organization. And we've got a bunch of examples here listed on the slide. Both of you, well, Jennifer, you basically talked about the importance of demonstrating how this applies beyond where it often rests. FCSS, my experience is FCSS is usually where this conversation starts, or at an HR level, it's where it's starting. And so there's always a real challenge of, okay, how to demonstrate that this isn't just an FCSS or an HR issue. This is across the organization. And so Jennifer, going back to you again, what examples did you use to make it relatable to people to understand, okay, this is how it applies to me in my role in public works or in recreation or at legislative services? How did you start that conversation?
Yeah, thanks, Darren. I found examples to be very, very helpful, and I really would suggest using them in your conversations, whether it's in your business case or just in your conversations around equity and inclusion. So some of the examples that we talked about here, municipalities put on wonderful events every year. And so I started with talking about events. One of the reasons that I did that is because when an event is put on, there are several business units that participate in that right away. And there are lots of questions we can ask. So we can talk about the location of the event, the lighting of the event, sound. We can talk about whether and how we advertise that event. Right there, I've talked about 3 or 4 business units right away. So again, deepening that relevancy for folks. We talked about equitable opportunity for staff. So being really honest about how it could be difficult for folks with diverse abilities to move through an organization, or to, so for example, if there's a person who has mobility needs, it can be very difficult for them to move up in an organization if that organization or that building is not accessible. And so really being honest and talking about that and looking at what you want for what the organization wants and what they want to be putting out there. You can talk about parks and community spaces. Are they well lit? Again, are they physically accessible? Not just are they accessible, but are the facilities within your parks and community spaces accessible? We have a community space that it's accessible, but the washroom inside of it is not. So really starting to look at those things that could have been missed. Who are we not seeing in our community spaces and why? That starts to look at the crossover between your public works and your planning and development areas as well. You can talk about your communications. What kind of materials are you putting out? What does your marketing look like? What imagery are we using in our materials? Is it representative of our community? And starting to ask those questions. So, for myself, I sat down, I looked at what departments are here, and I started to come up with examples in those departments of how it might touch them, so that I was prepared to have those conversations, place some of them in my business case, but just prepared myself to have those conversations in different areas.
Great. Erin, anything you want to add on this?
I think Jen did a great job of highlighting it. And again, I would just reinforce, often it can be one position who's responsible for, EDI work, or one department that the responsibility tends to be centralized. And my learnings over my career is that for this work to really be sustainable, it needs to be decentralized, and all the areas and work units within a municipality need to see their their role and where they can be looking at this from their work areas. So I think that having those examples, like Jennifer said, is really important. And for me, I'm also right now walking alongside several of the different business areas to say, okay, you've started to get a curiosity. What is something that you have coming up that I can walk you through? What are some of the pieces that you might want to think about from an equity lens? And so we're starting to have that with real world examples of what they're working on right now.
Okay, great, thank you. So just a reminder, everyone, I've seen a couple of questions come into the Q&A box, and we're going to get to those in just a moment here. We've got one last slide we're going to run through, but in the meantime, if you have questions that are popping up, feel free to drop those in the Q&A box, please. All right, so now this is the last piece that we're going to kind of cover, and then we'll jump into the Q&A. And this slide summarizes some of the key components of an effective business case to gain the support for equity and diversity and inclusion work. And so number one is obviously you need to summarize your current situation and the drivers for change. And so what are those drivers right now in your community? It could be the Black Lives Matter movement. It could be, you know, some expectations from the public. It could be, you know, some type of racist or discriminatory event that took place in your community, and you're looking to take some action. And so talking about your current situation and demonstrating why this matters and why it's relevant. Linkage to the municipality's vision. Both of you already talked about the importance of ensuring that you're really bringing it back to what is our municipality's vision statement? How does this align with that vision statement? How does it align with the corporate goals and that piece? Now, number three, we haven't spoken about yet. So Jennifer, can you talk about what kind of data you brought into your business case to support your position?
Yes, absolutely. We did look at what our current demographics are for the city, and we did highlight some opportunities there as well. But another thing that we did was we looked at what the projected demographics are going to be like. How are we growing? Who is choosing Alberta as home? And what might attract businesses or our residents to Fort Saskatchewan specifically? We asked questions like, how are we positioned to age? So we began to make a bit of that projection and what we might need to put in place for that projected demographics. We also did something, and we reached out to neighboring municipalities, and we had conversations about what was happening there, what was going really well, what were some of the barriers, and we made connections. And I'll say that this was definitely one of the strongest things for myself personally and for us in Fort Saskatchewan, because it helped us to start conversation it helped us to start this conversation in a stronger footing. I felt very supported. I knew what some others were doing, and I could give examples of that. I knew what had maybe not gone so well and what not to step into. And it certainly supported me, and I'm still very well connected to other municipalities in the region, and it's very helpful. I would suggest that for sure.
I'm a bit of a data person myself sometimes, and so I have often used the StatsCan community profiles. If you're a municipality that has not gone and downloaded those for your community, I highly recommend it. It'll highlight all kinds of information that you probably are surprised about in terms of diversity in languages, diversity, you know, the breakdown of the Indigenous populations in your community, you know, estimated number of immigrants in the last 5 years, I believe it is. There's all kinds of really interesting statistics that you can pull out of those community profiles. So, all right, so moving on to number 4, benefits to the organization or community. We've talked about that, really the importance here of your business case demonstrating here's the value and the benefits to our organization and to the community to be investing in this work. Erin spoke briefly about the risk analysis piece. You know, I'm not going to touch on that too much here, but if you have questions about the risk analysis that Jennifer, Erin talked about in terms of taking action, but I think, you know, Erin talked about the risks of not taking action, but there's also risks of taking action, that shift in power structure that some people might struggle with. So if you have questions about that, feel free to throw those in the Q&A. So that brings me to number 6, and that's the options and recommendations. Of course, any business case needs to identify, okay, here's our scenario, here is our options, and here's the recommendations that we are making. So Erin, in terms of your work and the analysis that you did and looking at your community and the priorities of the municipality, what were the options? How did you come to the various options that were available to you and ultimately narrow it down to the recommendations that you made?
Sure. Thank you, Darren. So I think one of the things that I want to add just in terms of the data to support business case is linked with the recommendations and options. So I also linked a lot with academic research. There's tons of research on diversity and inclusion in any specific area, public engagement, experiences with rec, loitering, all of these different things. There's tons of research out there. And so I consolidated a lot of that research in terms of developing the options and recommendations. And I wanted to make sure that there was a spectrum of options from we do nothing. And that was a choice that's on the table. It's obviously not the ideal choice or the choice I was hoping would come to fruition, but I did put that down as an option, all the way up to the spectrum of, this is, if we're really invested in this work, here's what we need to make that happen. And I had a spectrum within that. So I had 4 options to illustrate that spectrum of what we could do, from doing nothing all the way up to what was eventually approved, which is that idea of the 3-year initiative with the support for both resources and human resources and financial resources to support it. So an example of what I would highlight in the recommendation is, so in the community inclusion initiative, I talk about the need for an EDI committee. And ideally that EDI committee involves community members and is a hybrid with administrative members as the higher option or the preferred recommended option. But I also had other options of how we could have a committee that wouldn't be as labor intensive or cost intensive in those various options as well. So I really broke down the business case into what are some of the key things that we know we need and what would be kind of that spectrum within that I could utilize.
Great. Thanks, Erin. So moving on to number 7 and 8 is, which you've kind of just spoken about, that your business case talked about the human resource requirements. And Jennifer spoke about the importance of ensuring that this isn't just the human resource requirements in one department, but the human resource requirements across the organization. So how did you lay that out and speak to the importance of the financial piece that's also needed to do this work?
Thanks, Darren. So I think one of the key learnings that I would hope that people can take away from the webinar today is to not sell your diversity and inclusion work short. It goes back to that being honest, but also what is really needed to bring this work forward. What are the human resources that we need? What is the financial contribution we need? Because for me, I always try to look at my work from a do no harm perspective. And so if we do something without the proper resourcing, we could actually be causing more harm. And so that was the approach I took. So I asked for what I needed and was really honest about that. And I was okay with if it didn't get approved, because I didn't want to cause more harm to the community by doing something off the side of our desks, which is often what Jennifer talked about, or, without the proper resourcing to bring it to life. I also really highlighted lots of different areas that we would need support from in terms of other areas in the organization. So your city clerk, because when we're talking about that power shift and the structural changes, we have to be looking at administrative and corporate policies. So identifying the city clerk as having some major time commitment. Facilities, right? We also have an accessibility audit in our community inclusion initiative. So working with facilities, communications has significant hours because of that risk about some of the divisive language and some of the pushback you can get in moving this work forward. So we have a high investment from communications and our leadership team. We really highlighted and we're honest with our corporate leadership team that their investment in time is going to be needed for this to come forward and to be utilized. So other areas that I highlighted within, I'm just looking at my business case right now, just blanking. Human resources was another one. Obviously, if you're looking at doing this within an organization and you want to impact the diversity and inclusion, you need to look at your human resource practices and policies in terms of being inclusive. It's a must-have, I would say, for this work. Recreation, culture were also identified, and community social development. So those are some of the units that we specifically identified as human resource and effort hours needed.
Okay, thanks, Erin. And that brings us to the last two items that we've got listed for components of your business case, which is number 9, a timeline of proposed activities. And Jennifer, you spoke a little bit about setting expectations and being honest. So I'm assuming that was certainly an important piece of your business case, but also the measures of success. And so how did you approach, or how would you approach these two topics in a business case, in a written business case that you're going to take forward?
Yeah, thank you, Darren. You know, I wanted to talk about these two things together because I think there's a point to be made, a similar point to be made for both of them. Obviously, for any business case, you're going to want to outline your timeline, and you're going to want to acknowledge how you plan on measuring whether or not you've reached those timelines or those objectives you set in place. But what is a little different here is that we're also talking about changing conditions within the organization and potentially within the community, depending on what your action plan is. And measuring changing conditions is a little different than just measuring when you've achieved something. So for example, you might set out that you want to start to analyze your operations through an inclusive lens, and you might choose gender-based analysis plus as that tool. And you can definitely measure when you've got everyone trained to use that. You can also measure the amount of whether it's policies or new services that go through that. But that changing condition, that do people feel comfortable? Do they have what they need to be using that tool? Are you seeing it not only put into your operations, but actually change what's coming out, that condition that comes out, your outcomes? And so that takes a little bit longer, and it might be a little bit more difficult to actually measure. I found that you really want to be honest about that, but it was also another good place to make a point about there needing to be resources. There needs to be staff attached to doing this work and responsible for the objectives that you lay out. And that will really be evident when you're looking at your timeline and how things move along, as well as how you're measuring them.
Okay, great. So thank you. That's kind of our top 10, I guess I would say, components of a business case. And so we're now at question time. But before I open that up, I want to encourage those that are joining us, if there was something that really stuck out to you that was an aha moment for you, you know, we'd love to hear what that is in the chat box, just to kind of build that conversation. If there's something that you've really taken away so far that you're thinking, oh, I need to consider that or apply that in my work now, you know, drop it in the chat box and let us know. So we've received a few questions, and so we're going to jump right into those. First that I'll start with is question for Erin. What did you identify as a risk to safety and sustainability, and what was the basis for that?
That was an example where I used academic research. There's a lot of academic research on linking safety with many community factors, like the diversity of your community and how that community is set up in terms of conditions to whether it's going to have safety factors, like people are going to feel connected and sense of belonging. There's going to be less break and entries. People are going to feel that they can walk out on the street and not have to worry late at night. There's a lot that's linked to it. And so what I would suggest is, you know, happy afterwards, Darren, to send out some links for some of those research articles that I utilized for that. But I really wanted to make the link, especially with, you know, that perception that Spruce Grove is not as diverse as other areas within Alberta. How do we really show that, yes, it is diverse now, but it will also continue to get more diverse? And what does that actually look like? And how does that play out if we do nothing? And so that's the approach that I took with that, but happy to share some of those resources linking inclusion work with safety in the community.
So Jennifer, you spoke a little bit about the shift in power structure. And so the question that we have here is, how do you approach that shift? In terms of the conversation and prepping people for that conversation, I guess.
Thank you, Darren. Yeah, so for us, one of the things that I really needed to talk about was the fact that I am within one department, but now I'm going to go work across departments, and I'm going to make recommendations that go straight to our leadership team. And I'm going to be challenging the way things are done in departments that I don't work in. And so I really brought that up and was honest about that conversation. And we made a plan about how we would do that and how things would come forward. And so that plan is working for us as a city, but we couldn't, it would have been a lot more difficult to begin to make those suggestions and get into areas that are not the area that I work in specifically, if we wouldn't have talked about that at the forefront. And so for us, for me specifically, that's been incredibly helpful. And it's allowed others to know where I'm coming from before I even get there.
Okay, thank you. So we have a question about the PowerPoint that I mentioned. So if you go to AUMA's Welcoming and Inclusive Communities webpage, under the Measuring Inclusion tool, there's a PowerPoint that I believe Erin and Jennifer might have used or modified for their own purposes, internal conversations on this topic. And if you want to send an email to us at WIC, so wic@auma.ca, I can also send you a direct link that way, and we'll also maybe include a link to it in the information that we send out to all attendees. So there will be a link to this webinar sent out to all attendees, and plus Erin's already mentioned that she has some resources that she's willing to share links to. So we'll try to include all of that in one big email to everybody, so you have that information. So next question that we see here is, what type of training can you recommend, please? So be more specific about the type of training that you're offering, I guess, from an internal operational perspective. How about we go with either of you want to volunteer? Go ahead, Erin.
I think we could both talk to this. I think what you need to do, and one of the things that was really great about getting working with AUMA for the Measuring Municipal Inclusion, is to understand where your organization currently is on that kind of culture of inclusion. So is the idea of inclusion still really invisible? People don't even see that it's a problem. Is there a budding awareness of it? Or is there already active steps to create an inclusive culture? Because where you are in that process is going to be really key to the types of training that you provide. So for example, GBA Plus is really good for gaining awareness and getting people to think differently and building that. But it's also created a lot more questions of like, whoa, now that I know that this is something I hadn't considered, what do I do next? So I would recommend other training. It really depends on what your organization is moving towards and what where you want to go. But unconscious bias training is one that I really recommend. In order to do diversity and inclusion work well, we have to be able to be continually learning. We have to be humble, and we have to be willing to be self-reflective as individuals and as an organization. And so unconscious bias training is one that I wholeheartedly believe in terms of propelling the organization forward. But even things like the blanket exercise or other experiential learning opportunities are also really great to get people talking and thinking about very specific segments of the population.
For my own learning, the unconscious bias training certainly, done effectively, can really highlight, even from a scientific basis, how our minds work and how we have to retrain ourselves to think differently. And the experiential exercise, again, I 100% agree. One of my first experiences was having the opportunity to participate in a walk of privilege exercise at a conference. That was instrumental in shifting my thinking on so many levels. And it ultimately addresses the unconscious bias through an alternative way, right? And so my biases were very, very much challenged that day, and I'm very thankful for the City of Lethbridge who put on that conference back many years ago. So, okay, next question. Did either of you establish an internal equity, diversity, and inclusion committee?
I can speak to that. We did. We have an internal committee that's functioning now. It is absolutely, in my opinion, something that needs to be done, whether it looks like a project team or a committee, whatever is going to work better in your municipality and for what you're bringing out. But here in Fort Saskatchewan, we have a committee. It is well represented. We have 10 different departments represented on the committee and people at various levels in the department. And so while I do, I lead the committee and I bring work back to that, that committee as a table brings lens that I couldn't bring by myself, ask questions that I couldn't ask, and also helps with building the capacity within the organization. So I have champions, 10 champions at that table, 10 people that are learning deeper, 10 people that are able to take on pieces of work. So I find, personally, I would suggest it. And I think it's very important if you can find a way to have some cross-departmental work going on.
Erin, how about yourself?
So we have, as part of the Community Inclusion Initiative, the intent to build an internal committee. We have a project team right now that is interdepartmental, working on bringing out the action plans from the Measuring Municipal Inclusion Initiative. And one of their goals is to create a terms of reference and establish that in that committee. We plan for it to be internal at first, so we can do some more self-work. But over the 3 years, we are expecting that to become a one where there are community representatives on as well, and advisors. So we're excited to go on that journey.
So the next question we have, I think, well, it's a quote. Jennifer, you were quoted here in this question. Who are we not seeing in our public spaces and why? So I think and the question is, I guess it's more of a comment. The key question is, do we care if those people are seen or not? So I guess that's a question of whether or not council or administration sees an issue there. So, and the comment is, I think that is the conversation we need to have first. I think that's a really important conversation or topic to maybe dive into a little bit. Do either of you want to talk a little bit about trying to profile that people that come to town halls and people that are the loud voices are often, we're not hearing from the quiet voices, the people that don't feel comfortable speaking out or don't feel comfortable attending a public event, and that those voices those individuals need to be served as well. So do either of you want to talk about how you approach that subject?
Yeah, I think, and again, for me, one of the things I've learned in my experience is we have to be strong allies and we have to call people on racism and those things. But also, if we just take a stance of like, all that is like, what do we care? Do we actually really care? Then we're not opening that space for that conversation in a way that actually invites people into the journey with us. So I would recommend, rather than having the conversation of, do we actually care, of again, who's not coming, like Jennifer said, but then why does that matter to us? Does it matter to us? And who are we serving and who are we not serving as a municipality? So just, you're still having the same conversation, just in a way that invites people in a different, a more curious fashion. But, what's interesting is a lot of times with specifically public participation or public engagement, we often hear, well, the opportunity was there, people just didn't take it. We provided the opportunity and then just people didn't come or they chose not to participate. And I think that that's an example right there of where we need to say, what is our bias there? What is our assumptions that we're making about A, do people actually have the choice? B, in what kind of space have we set up for them to come and participate in. And so it gives that opportunity when those kind of comments come up to say, let's break that down a little bit. Let's sit in that for a minute. Let's have a conversation about that. And what does that really mean in the context of the work we do as a municipality? So, you know, you're never going to get in this work 100% buy-in from all the people across your organization. And I've learned in my career with community development and in the municipality that it's always going to be more advantageous to focus on those people that are curious but need those skills or want those conversations or are open to those, and the people that are allies, and getting them alongside and leveraging that momentum is going to get you a lot further than focusing energy on the people that are naysayers, or they're not convinced, or they don't buy into the idea. They may come along down the road, but if we put our efforts there first, we're probably going to hit a brick wall. Jennifer, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that was really well put, Erin. It made me think of something out of parenting, back to Darren's earlier comment. Pay attention to what you want to see more of, and really leaning into those that are curious and are asking the why and giving more information there will lend more to the conversation. Yeah.
So we are getting to the end of our time, and there's a few questions. Leslie, I see you. I wish we could dive into all those questions. They're really good questions, but we'll have to follow up by email with you on a couple of them. But it's the questions where, you know, are you willing and able to share your business cases? I guess that's a good question. Are either of your business cases that went to council, are they publicly available?
I could certainly share components of what went forward in a written way, if that would be helpful for folks.
Ours did not, the full business case did not go forward in the council report, and it is not a public facing document. So unfortunately, I am not able to share the full business case.
Okay, great.
But happy to talk about it with anybody that wants. Great,
thanks. And the other question we have here was around, you know, recommendations on type of unconscious bias training and the presenters. But I think we'll have to take that offline afterwards. So, but thank you for those questions that came forward, and thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this webinar and would like to know, you know, take in some other training that we've offered or through this type of format, you can check out our YouTube channel at the link that the bit.ly/AUMA_YouTube, and you'll find there we have a channel under our Welcoming and Inclusive Community stream where we have webinars over the last 5 years dealing with the experience of refugees, supporting transgender employees, what is Islamophobia and how to address it. We've got a bunch of interesting topics on there, so feel free to dive in. If you'd like to subscribe to our WIC email newsletter, just go to auma.ca, click on the news button, and then there's a link there where you can subscribe to AUMA's regular newsletter and also subscribe to our WIC newsletter, which comes out less frequently. And then, of course, visit our website and you'll be able to just Google Welcoming and Inclusive Communities Initiative AUMA, and you'll get all the information. We've got links to all kinds of resources that AUMA has developed, but also organizations across Canada and the world. We're linking to content around there. And of course, if you're with a municipal organization, highly recommend you download the Measuring Inclusion tool and try and start a conversation in your own organization. And before you leave, I want to do a quick poll here. I'm just going to launch that here. We just want to make sure that did this meet your expectations? We'd love to know whether you were satisfied with today's session, and that should be on your screen now. Please take a moment to do that. Again, it is anonymous. And lastly, on behalf of our audience and behalf on the AUMA team, Erin and Jennifer, thank you so much for contributing all your time, your sharing your knowledge and expertise. We truly appreciate that. So hope everyone has a great day, and I hope this content and this information will help put you in a position to be able to put together a really strong and effective business case to move forward in your own organization. It's so valuable when you can start to bring all these pieces together and put forward a really important argument for the importance and the value and the benefit long-term for your community to be doing this work. So, and feel free to get in touch with us if you have any more questions at wic@auma.ca. Thanks so much for your time, and enjoy your day.